Okay. I'm here today to talk to you about water conservation planning. And this goes back quite a long way. To give you a little bit of history on this, we've been through in the region, particularly the center region, we've been through the concept of water conservation planning as far back as 2005. Back in 2005, the center region took action through the Public Services Environmental Committee to say, yes, we do in fact want to have a region, at least a region-wide water conservation plan, and to implement that and to develop that plan, they handed it over to the Chamber of Business and Industry of Center County. So they were supposed to lead the effort. It appears that they are finally ready to get started on that. I had a meeting with them before Christmas just to talk about getting things rolling on this, and that's kind of what this presentation is about, to tell you, to get everybody, it's kind of weird having like part of you over there and part of you over here, to have some idea of how a water conservation plan is developed according to the EPA Guidance manual. There is a well thought out guidance manual that EPA put together. They spent an awful lot of time and energy working on how communities should do water conservation plans, and it was suggested back in 2005 that that would be a good route to follow, at least as a template. Obviously we're unique, and EPA recognizes that every water supply area and every watershed is different, so they suggest that you can change things, but it's a really good template to start with. So I'm going to spend some time going through that process that is recommended by EPA, give you some idea of how that hits us. I'm not going to fill in a whole lot of the blanks. The blanks are supposed to be filled in by the people that are going to be on the committee that does the water conservation plan. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time giving you my idea on what those blanks should be filled in with, because I don't want to taint it one way or another. So I'm going to tell you more about the process, about how that might work in our area, point out some of the people that should be involved in this, and then have a lot of room for discussion at the end. So this is going to be a relatively short presentation, a lot more discussion. So think up lots of questions. You can interrupt me at any time, don't mind. And supposedly I should be able to, okay, there we go. So most people, when they think about water conservation, they immediately think of, oh, we got to use less water. So generally people think about taking an action to reduce the amount of water per person. That sounds really, really good. Yeah, that's a great idea. Except that that's kind of similar to saying this, that you might as well, in order to reduce the strain on the food supply, people should just move as little as possible and not exercise, because that's the best way to reduce the strain on the food supply. If everybody eats just a little bit and doesn't do a whole lot, then you have less strain on it. So while it's a really good idea and it's certainly part of any water conservation plan, it should not be used as the goal. So a better way of looking at it is, how do you get the greatest benefit? You have a limited resource. The water that we have available, there's only so much of it. So instead of looking at how do we use as little as possible, we should look at it as all of this water is being used for something all of the time. Sometimes individual water molecules are used over and over and over again as they get from the top end of our watershed to the bottom end of our watershed. So it's really about how do we get the greatest benefit out of the water, every drop of water that's in the watershed. So fortunately, we have a really cool mission statement for the Watershed Association. There it is. And this is pretty much an all-encompassing thing. And I looked at this and said, that really is kind of what EPA is getting at as far as how a water conservation plan should be developed. So changing just a little bit, we changed the part in green there, and you come up with, this is what an effective water conservation plan should do. It should accomplish your mission. It should make it so that you can do what you want to do. This is what we have decided we want to do, so our water conservation plan should do the same thing. It has to be a situation where everybody wins. There are no losers in a water conservation plan. Everything wins. And I added in everything because it's not just about the people, it's not just about the economy, it's also about the environment. So we got to look at who gets this water. You know, it's not, when there's a lack of water, what happens in the region? Now, fortunately, recently we haven't had any major catastrophic events, but there are some that are happening in the country that are similar to our watershed that you should take a look at. Down in Texas, there's this wonderful thing called the Edwards Aquifer. It's an aquifer-driven system, just like our system, only it has a whole lot less water. Generally, it's a more arid area, but lots and lots of people are relying on an aquifer almost entirely for providing the water that is needed for the people and all of the agricultural activity. In Texas now, they are the water level in that aquifer is dropping so rapidly that they are fast-tracking water reuse projects similar to ours, and they're going to actually use that water for drinking water. And they're fast-tracking that so quick, the regulatory agencies are just standing back and saying, do whatever you want. Pretty much got to do what you got to do. So we don't want to end up in a situation where we get to that point. So we should plan how we're going to make sure that if that ever happens to us, if the climate changes enough here that we are impacted, you know, let's say we go through a 3-year drought, what are we going to do? Who loses in our current situation? Well, obviously we're not going to stop people from using water. So water is still going to be taken out of the aquifer. So the real loser under our current situation is going to be the environment. It's going to be Spring Creek and its tributaries. Those streams are going to have less water than they should. There's a lot of water withdrawal permits. I counted 25 million gallons per day worth before I stopped counting. There's probably a lot more out there that I don't know about, but theoretically, if everybody pumped everything that they could, that's how much they could pump out of the aquifer every day. That's what's permitted. Now, nobody's doing that. We're not coming anywhere close to 25 million gallons a day of water use. It's not like, oh, I have a permit, so I should turn it on and pump all that water out of the ground. But the point is those sources are permitted, so there's really nothing that stops people from doing this. There's nothing that stops the water authorities and the Fish and Boat Commission and Penn State from taking out what they need to accomplish their needs. Fortunately, we do have very responsible water suppliers around here, and they tend to manage those very, very well. And I think that they would probably, if we were in a severe drought situation, they would start taking measures to curtail that use. But the point is they are permitted for that, and they're going to give the water to the humans as the humans need it. So here are the steps that EPA says are in a water conservation plan. And you notice that a lot of them, you don't even start talking about conservation measures until you get all the way down to step number 5. The rest of it is talking about what do you really want to accomplish, looking at how water is used in the area, how, who needs it, what needs it. A lot of it is almost like a watershed plan, which fortunately we have the beginnings of a watershed plan here. So and we have a tremendous amount of data. So we can answer a lot of these questions very quickly, preparing a demand forecast, et cetera, getting all the way down. So there's a total of 9, whoops, those ones didn't come up with numbers. Those are all the steps. There's 9 steps in the EPA plan for a community our size. And EPA has 3 different versions of the plan based on the community size. So I was looking at it as, all right, if we did it for the entire watershed, which makes a whole lot of sense to me, then we're in the 100,000 category, which puts us in the plan. So I'm going to go through each of these things and give you an idea of what they mean. So identifying conservation goals, you could have as a goal, use the least amount of water per person as possible. That could be your conservation goal. Don't necessarily think that would make sense, but there's other things that are important to look at, and this is what EPA emphasizes. A water conservation plan, the reason why it's important to do it is not because it feels good, it's because it can save you money. If you postpone or eliminate future projects because you have implemented a water conservation plan, then it's economically beneficial. You're doing more with less, so you're kind of making yourself bulletproof and you're making it possible for more economic development. EPA emphasizes that the environment should be taken care of in water conservation planning. You got to look at it. Okay, so any plan that we develop should look at how much water do the streams and tributaries really need, what's the minimum amount, we should at least meet that minimum, maybe we should shoot for something higher. That's something that needs to be identified early on in the water conservation plan. How much water does the environment need and where does it need it? So another thing that they suggest is you should really look at drought resistance. Climate change happens regardless of, for whatever reason, climate change happens. There are drought years, there are long-term droughts as we're seeing happen in various parts of the country. If you look back in the historical record, even looking just at tree ring records from hundreds of years ago, it's quite obvious that there are periods of long-term drought no matter where you are in the world. They happen. EPA suggests that you prepare for that in your conservation plan. Developing a water system profile it's kind of like the math behind where, it's basically, if you think about it, it's where is all the water going and where should all the water go. So, in our case, most of the water ends up in the aquifer. That's kind of like our storage reservoir, but then it needs to be in other places. Where is it going and how is it getting there? And why is this important? Well, in a water conservation plan, as you look at the infrastructure that you might be able to prevent having to expand, if you have a lot of water over here and you need water over here, if you need less of it over here, then you don't need a bigger pipe to get it there. You may be able to eliminate the need to build a bigger pipe. You may be able to eliminate the need to build a treatment plant. Also in the water system profile, you look at any of the conservation measures that are already in place. Maybe you already have an education program. In this area, one thing we do have is we've adopted the building code. You can't go to Home Depot or Lowe's and get anything but a water conservation toilet, faucet, etc. So anytime anybody does a home renovation project, they're doing water conservation whether they like it or not. All of our new buildings, water conservation. Some entities have gone to extreme measures on water conservation. I'm not going to jump on what Penn State's doing. They can tell you about that, but some of the stuff they've done in their buildings, pretty amazing. Preparing a demand forecast. This is where you look at how much water do you need now, how much water are you going to need in the future, how much water does the environment need, what are you trying to do with things, where's the future growth going to be. So this kind of has to tie into the region's comprehensive plan, and that's a good thing to look at. The comprehensive plan is supposed to be a very long-term document, so you should be able to get some idea looking at that comprehensive plan how much water is going to be needed where. Here in the watershed, we're talking about a collection of comprehensive plans. There's the Center Region Comprehensive Plan for the upper end of the watershed, then there's comprehensive plans for lower in the watershed and the county comprehensive plan as well. So you got to look at all those and try to figure out where and when is it needed, how much growth are we going to have where, what impact is that going to have. So you basically prepared this demand forecast the reason why you're doing this is because that's going to determine where all those capital projects are that you might be able to avoid or postpone in the future. You want to describe all of the planned facilities. Some things are already planned. We know from the beneficial reuse project at UAJ, we have plans to expand that system. So that's already a planned thing. So that's what we're looking at, is what is already planned to happen in the watershed. The State College Borough Water Authority has plans for expanding the size of water mains in places. They have plans to loop water mains together that are not currently looped. So you put all that stuff into your water conservation plan too, because those things have costs, and if some of those can be avoided or postponed, you save money, which is a good thing. Identifying conservation measures. This is looking at what you already have in place, plus what are your ideas for how you can save. So you've already done the first 4 steps, and now you're looking at, it's kind of a brainstorming thing. What could we possibly do here in the region, in the watershed, to conserve water? And that can be the normal things like, well, we could do education, we can do water reuse. We're already doing some of that. We can look at reducing the amount of evaporation and transpiration that is happening. For example, golf course management. Golf courses use a lot of water. Helping a golf course use 5% less water, pretty huge impact. So, there's a lot of different things that you can come up with on looking at the water conservation things. It's not all about, a lot of people immediately think, well, we should have water conservation rates to encourage people to use less water. Actually, that's one of the least effective methods out there, but it is part of a water conservation plan and it should certainly be looked at. But there's a lot of other things. Education has been identified as one of the key components. You got to have a lot of education, and that's oftentimes the hardest part. It gets a little easier to educate people as to why they should conserve if you can give them a list of things and say, if we do conserve, here are the projects that we will not have to pay for because they will not be needed because we've conserved. So that's why all that other stuff is really important. So you got to look at, and the conservation measures all come with a cost. For example, replacing all of the remaining high flow toilets with low flow toilets. Well, first we have to figure out how many are left out there, where are they, and then what's the cost. Actually, that's a relatively inexpensive process, but then you also have to deal with the issues of all the people that have already done that. They'll look and say, well, gee, why don't I get paid for what I already did? You're going to pay them to fix theirs, but I didn't get paid for mine. So you have to deal with the social issues that go along with this and the fairness issues as well. Certainly information and education. We do have a really good kind of mechanism here in this region to get information out to people. I think generally people in this region tend to read a lot of stuff and they're online all the time. So we're probably better suited around here to get information and educational programs into the people's hands and have them, and expect them to do something with it, but still it costs money to develop and it takes a lot of time and effort. Education programs tend to be very, very what I call labor intensive, so you got to be ready for that too. So then you take all these things that you've listed that are possible conservation alternatives, and again, you haven't selected anything at this time, you're still just kind of brainstorming. You look at all of the benefits and costs. So you're looking at, what happens when you do, and all the benefits and costs are in these four categories. Metering is a big thing. Everything should be metered. Well, we're pretty much on our way to that, but not everything. You'll hear from water authorities and providers will say, well, we do have everything metered. EPA points to metering being at the point of use. So metering at the street where it goes into an apartment complex doesn't really give you the ability to encourage through volumetric billing or conservation rates any kind of control on those individual users. The individual users need to be the ones that are metered. So you can have a master meter at the street, but you're not really metered until you have each unit metered individually. So there's a long way to go on that in this region. So even though everything is metered and we know how much water is going everywhere, we don't know where it's going within that complex. Same thing holds true for metering within businesses, primarily industries. A lot of industries you go into and you'll see their facility, they have water meters all over the place because they want to be able to track where the water's going. It's really important to them. And that's what we need to encourage all the way across the board to get this metering thing done. Looking at your accounting and loss control. One of the things EPA has recognized is that there's a significant amount of water loss because people aren't doing a very good job of keeping track of where it's going. Just starting to keep a better track of where it's going results in identifying, oh my gosh, we have this going in here and we have this going out here. Why are these numbers significantly different? It can lead to identification of leaks, water loss through, if we had a reservoir, it would be evaporation, things like that. So by accounting for it better and looking where all the water's going, you can figure out where your leaks are. Costing and pricing. Again, in order to sell this to the public and make really good decisions, everything has to be listed as a benefit and cost. So you need to list those out for each of the alternatives that you have for water conservation. You've got to look at the impact that it's going to have and how much it's going to cost. And then, of course, the information and education, there's lots and lots of different ways to do that. Those also have costs, so these kind of cross over. But in this step, we're trying to look at all the benefits and costs of implementing each of those ideas that we came up in the previous step. That's the goal there. So then finally, in step number 7, we're ready to select what we're going to do for conservation. So we rank all of those things, and we set up criteria to determine which ones we should do when. Maybe we decide, well, we should do all of them, but we're not going to turn around in 1 year and say, okay, we're going to implement every single conservation measure all at one time. So you set up a selection criteria to determine what is the most important and when, and you list all that out. You can have, it's not unheard of for communities to go through this process and say, well, we really don't need to do any water conservation. I don't think that's going to be the case here, but it has happened in the country where communities get done with this whole thing and say, well, we're done. Finally, in step 8, we're getting almost to the end of this. You integrate the resources and modify the forecast. So now it's kind of like going back to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan shows what you want to do. Well, this is what you're going to do in your water conservation plan, is you're going to show what those impacts are going to be. So you're going to change all of your forecasts based on implementing the water conservation plan. And that'll give you a different picture. And generally, this can be done, this is where you get out the really cool graphs that show, here's what we would do if we continued down the track that we were going with water conservation. Here's the new graph that shows where we're going this way. You can do that for water use. You can do that for dollars spent, all kinds of different ways to show how good this is. The reason why you want to have all of this work, all the way through here, we've been documenting very carefully what the benefits are of water conservation. That feeds back into the education program. In order to get people to want to conserve, some people we have a lot of people around here that will just conserve because it's a good idea. Most people want to know why it's a good idea. What's in it for me? And if we can show them your water bills, your sewer bills, etc., are all going to be lower because we've implemented this conservation program, then they're going to be happy with that. They're more likely to want to conserve. It's kind of like if you show in a solid waste bill, look, if we recycle, maybe not immediately you're going to have a lower bill, but over the long period of time you can show that it's going to be less expensive if you recycle a lot. So that's kind of the message. You're looking at how to get this out to all the people, because all the people have to participate in a conservation plan. So finally, you present all this stuff, and then of course you have to figure out how it's going to get paid for. There's a lot of entities out there that are, once you've gone through all of this, and a lot of these people are going to be the participants anyhow, you're already going to have shown them that they're going to be saving a lot of money, so it's generally not hard to get them to say, well, we should implement the water conservation plan because we're going to get to save a lot of money. But you have to get to that point, and that's why all the other steps are so important. You got to get through all that so that you can show very clearly. A water conservation plan is kind of a living thing, like a comprehensive plan. You got to revisit it frequently to show how you're doing, what kind of progress you're making, and also be open for making changes along the way. It's kind of like our watershed monitoring program around here. Every year we go through looking at the watershed and seeing what the status is. We need to do that with a water conservation program too. Keep up to date with where it is going, what we're accomplishing, and see if new ideas pop up that can make things even better. One of the key things in the EPA guidance is that public involvement is absolutely crucial to a proper water conservation plan. And they also include in there that water reuse is a very important component. And water reuse is not just what UAJ is doing, where you let the water go all the way to a wastewater treatment plant, treat it, and send it all the way back. That is certainly water reuse, but also water reuse inside of an industrial facility, water reuse higher up in the watershed, looking at, the water was, it came into a facility clean, water got used for something, but it's not really that dirty, so we can use it again for something else, or maybe another entity can use it. So looking at different water reuse things. Can you use the water for irrigation? Penn State uses an awful lot of water for irrigation that went through their wastewater treatment system. So there's a lot of different things that you can do for water reuse, and that is something that EPA pointed out that communities really need to take a hard look at. So how do you get started on this? Well, you need a planning committee, a water conservation planning committee. The Chamber of Business and Industry were charged by the Center Region Council of Governments through the Public Services and Environmental Committee to lead this charge. So they will be putting together if and when they choose to continue on this, they will be putting together a committee to start looking at this. So you need lots of different entities in it. It would be kind of foolish to go into this without having all of the water providers, all the public water providers, and even the private water providers involved in the process, because they're the ones that are taking the water out of the ground. You also need all of the sewer authorities, because they're the ones that are treating water and putting the water back into the environment. Penn State does both of those, so they clearly need to be involved in this. And DEP, Fish and Boat Commission, you folks, there's an awful lot of environmental groups, whatever. You can put whoever you want in this, but there's certainly groups that really have to be involved in this. The people that are generally using mass quantities of water, pumping it out of the ground, putting it back into the ground, or into the creeks, those are the ones who have to be involved. The other ones, it's nice if you get extras. EPA did say in their guidance that it's really handy if you have environmental groups to make sure that the environment is taken care of, because oftentimes when a water provider does the water conservation program on their own, many times the environment gets shortchanged. So somebody's got to watch that. So it's best if the environmental groups are just involved in it at the front end. It's a good idea to have municipal commitment. At the top end of the watershed, we already have that. The Center Region Council of Governments took action to say, go do a water conservation plan. So we have municipal commitment through the Council of Governments. What we don't have is a budget, but fortunately, a lot of the upfront stuff doesn't require a whole lot of budget anyhow. Generally, when these water conservation plans are done, the budget usually comes out of the water suppliers and the sewer authorities. They tend to be the ones, it's almost like looking at our watershed monitoring plan. Money comes from lots of different entities. Some commit a lot of money, others commit a little bit of money, but they all commit something. So that's kind of what I think we're looking at here, is putting together a budget that everybody feels a little bit of pain and has a little bit of commitment, but you're going to need a budget for something. Do you necessarily need a consultant? Well, that's up to the committee to decide. I think that it can be done without a consultant. They may decide that it needs to be done with a consultant. That's up to them.